All right, today we're diving into the political history of Ladakh. And this is a story that was almost lost to time, one that was literally born from the ashes of a fallen empire.
So let me ask you something. How do you write the history of a place that, well, has no written records? Picture this, a kingdom whose first few chapters are just blank pages. How do you even begin to tell that story? Well, that is the exact puzzle historians have faced with early Ladakh.
Yeah, for centuries, its early history was a total mystery. I mean, no texts, no lists of kings, no chronicles, nothing. But here's the cool part. The story isn't actually lost, it's just scattered. So in this explainer, we're going to put on our detective hats and piece this whole thing together, clue by clue. Okay, so to really get a grip on its history, we've got to start with the land itself. It's unique. Let's jump into our first section, Land of Mystery.
You know, Ladakh has had a bunch of different names over the years. Mariol, which means the Red Land, the Land of Llamas, even the Moon City. And this isn't just some fun trivia, right? It tells you something really important. From the very beginning, this place was a crossroads, a meeting point for all sorts of different cultures and people.
And geographically, whoa, Ladakh is a land of extremes. We're talking about a cold desert squeezed between these massive, towering mountain ranges. It's actually one of the highest and most isolated places people live on the entire planet. And that isolation, that's absolutely key to its story. And this brings us right to the heart of the problem. There's a quote that says the history of Ladakh up until the 10th century is basically blurred with mystery. The political story is almost a complete unknown. So if the written records are a dead end, how on earth do you solve a mystery like that? Well, that very question leads us right into our second section, the historical puzzle. So how do historians actually do it? Well, they've got this fascinating toolkit they use. First, they look at literary sources that were written down much later, things like the Chronicles of Ladakh. Then they get their hands dirty with archaeology, digging up clues from settlements that go way, way back, some to 2000 BCE. And finally, they listen. They listen to the folklore, the legends, the oral traditions that have been passed down for generations. It's not one thing, you see. It's the combination of all three that really unlocks the past. Okay, so with these tools in hand, where do our historical detectives even start? The answer is pretty surprising. It's not in Ladakh itself, but with the collapse of a huge neighboring superpower. Let's get into Section 3, An Empire Crumbles. So back in the 9th century, you've got the mighty Tibetan Empire. It's a huge deal, a major power in the region. But then it starts to fall apart. It begins to fracture. And this event, which for all the world looked like a complete disaster, would ironically be the very thing that sparked the birth of Ladakh. And what was the trigger? It all came down to one single event, the assassination of Lang Dharma. He was the anti-Buddhist king of Tibet, and he'd been really brutal. But his death, it didn't just create a power vacuum, it completely shattered the empire. And what happened next was just a classic succession crisis. Lang Dharma gets assassinated in 842 CE. His heirs immediately start fighting for control. And fast forward a bit to around 900 CE, and central Tibet is in a state of total anarchy. The old royal family, they had no choice but to flee for their lives. And this right here is the turning point. For those fleeing royals, this was the end of an era. But for the remote, rugged lands to the west, for what would become Ladakh, it was the beginning of absolutely everything. And out of all that chaos, a founder is about to emerge. This brings us right to Section 4, A Kingdom is Forged. So, out of the turmoil, our main character steps onto the stage, a prince named Nimagan. Now, he was a direct descendant of those old Tibetan kings. He gets his loyal followers together, escapes the civil war, and heads west, deep into those rugged lands that would eventually become Ladakh. But Nimagan wasn't just some refugee on the run. This guy was a brilliant strategist. He starts by attacking a local principality, but then, instead of getting bogged down in a long war, he makes this incredibly savvy political move. He marries the local lord's only daughter. And this gives us such a key insight, you know? Building a nation in a place like this often comes down to clever diplomacy and alliances, not just brute force. He used that marriage to build a power base, and from that foothold, he started annexing all the little scattered kingdoms around him. So sometime between 900 and 930 CE, Nimagan pulled all his conquests together and officially founded the new kingdom of Nangaris. He even set up his capital at a place called She.
And this is the moment that recorded political history really begins in Ladakh.
All right, so the kingdom is founded. Now let's see how it started to evolve into what we think of as Ladakh. On to our final section, the first Ladakhi kings.
So after Nemagon's death, his huge new kingdom was split between his three sons. And this is super important. His oldest son, Pelgugain, he inherited the core territory, the heartland of Upper Ladakh, which back then was called Mariol. And it's this specific piece of land that became the very first truly independent Ladakhi kingdom. Now, for about the next 100 years or so, the kings that followed Pelgugain, well, they were mostly just names in a book. They did a good job holding the kingdom together, but they weren't really expanding it. But as you can probably guess, that was all about to change. Around 1080 CE, a new ruler takes the throne, a man named King Lahachin Utpala. The old chronicles describe him as an enthusiastic king, which is pretty cool. And get this, his name, Utpala, is actually Indian, which hints that there were growing cultural ties with the south. And Utpala definitely lived up to that enthusiastic reputation. This guy wasn't just a ruler, he was a conqueror and on a grand scale. He invaded Kulu to the south and made them pay him tribute every single year. But he didn't stop there, no way. His armies pushed out and subdued this massive territory, stretching all the way from modern-day Nepal to Baltistan. And the tribute he demanded, it was smart, it was strategic. He wanted practical things, iron for weapons, and zaws, those tough yak cow hybrids that were totally essential for transport and farming in this high-altitude empire. So, you see, this wasn't just about grabbing more land. This was a fundamental shift in who held power in the region. Under King Utpala, the kingdom reached its first great peak. For a short but absolutely brilliant period, this little kingdom that was started by a refugee prince became the greatest power in the entire Western Himalayas. So, in the end, the early history of Ladakh wasn't really erased at all. It was just waiting for the right clues to be found and pieced together. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it? How many other histories out there, all across the world, aren't truly lost, but are simply waiting for us to piece them together from myth and from memory and from stone?